thank you to everybody for dialing in today. Thanks for your interest in this. My name is Eric Basier with Quantum, and we're going to be talking about 8 reasons you need LTO-8 and some exciting new technologies and capabilities that the LTO-8 technology is bringing to tape storage. One of the things we've seen at the consortium is LTO continues to be a really key technology as part of data center infrastructures, but we are seeing that the usage of tape across the industry is changing and evolving. And where tape used to be maybe a primary backup target or primarily about a backup storage device, we're seeing the usage evolve into 2 broad categories. LTO tape storage as a low-cost archive for massive scale data sets. Sometimes people talk about these as unstructured data sets. And a lot of that content lives either in the enterprise or even in the public cloud. We'll talk more about kind of that role of LTO and some of the benefits it provides. The other thing we're seeing in the data center is LTO's role as an offline data protection solution to protect against ransomware and malware. And when we look at kind of the technology future of LTO, some of the new capabilities we have, it fits these use cases really well. Here's some additional data from the press and from kind of public sources about the emerging use of LTO in some of these areas. And, you know, a couple of things to highlight. Huge move among the major cloud providers to embrace tape. All cloud vendors will be using tape, using it at a level never before seen. One of the reasons we like to include some of these data points is, just like with other technologies like hyperconvergence, many of our enterprise customers that are using LTO will start to take a cue from these large public cloud providers in terms of how our enterprise customers architect their data centers and their infrastructure. And we think that the hyperscale public cloud vendors are kind of on the leading edge of what a lot of enterprises will be dealing with. So this is just one of the reasons why we believe LTO has a strong future and why we continue to progress the roadmap and invest in the technology. We recently published some stuff on LTO.org, our website, that talks about 8 reasons you need LTO-8. And we thought it would be good to do a webinar on this and basically kind of look at each one of these reasons and double click on each one, so to speak, just to go into a little bit more depth on each one. I'm not going to read necessarily off of this slide, but you guys can kind of look at the 8 reasons, and we want to talk about each one of these. So this will kind of be the framework for today's discussion, and I'll come back to this at the end and kind of conclude with it. The first reason is pretty simple, and we talk about this a lot, but you can store more with LTO-8. So LTO-8 tape cartridges can provide up to 30 terabytes of compressed capacity per tape. We've doubled what we've done with LTO-7. And for many years with LTO, this has almost been taken for granted, but there was a lot of technology innovation that went into doing this. And, you know, for LTO to continue to compete against, you know, different technology offerings out there, cloud storage, object storage, hard drives, all that, we need to continue to you know, develop this roadmap and this density curve. So this was a huge advance, and I think it really gives our customers a great value in terms of the value of LTO-8, even relative to LTO-7. We'll talk about the roadmap at the end and how we expect to kind of continue to progress this trend. The second thing, and this is also a new capability of LTO-8 technology that's had a lot of interest from the market, and this is LTO-7 Type M media. At the highest level, LTO-7 Type M media is a new feature, a new capability, and it allows an LTO-8 drive to, let's say, format and then view an LTO-7 cartridge so that that cartridge can hold up to 9 terabytes of capacity native or 22.5 terabytes compressed. Effectively, we're increasing the capacity of a standard LTO-7 cartridge by 50%. And right now in the market, this would represent the lowest cost per terabyte option in terms of storage, basically, right? Because we've increased the capacity on that cartridge by 50%. We haven't increased the price. So we're seeing a lot of interest in this, and I think a general blueprint or profile that a lot of customers are looking at is they're investing in new tape libraries or new tape drives, LTO-8 tape drives, and looking to use this LTO-7 Type M media. So we want to talk about this a little bit more. Some of the images that you see are actually from a video that the consortium just created to talk about LTO-7, and we can explain, you can find that through the LTO website. So let's talk about LTO-7 Type M media a little bit more. How can it be used? How can it be purchased? Stuff like that. So you can actually purchase LTO-7 Type M media pre-initialized, or when it's purchased, you can add an M8 barcode, and then the tape library that's inserted in will recognize that as LTO-7 Type M media. One caveat to be aware of is once a LTO-7 tape has been initialized as a Type M, it is a one-time operation. It can't be reversed. The other question we get a lot is, can I take an existing LTO-7 tape and kind of reformat it as a Type M? And the answer to that is no. This has to be a brand new LTO-7 tape to get this capability. Last but not least, kind of some other things around Type M media. It can be written and read in an LTO-8 drive. Just like the other, just like any other type of media, the tapes are interchangeable between vendors, so we take advantage of that interoperability capability that kind of makes LTO open. And LTO-7 Type M does support the features compression, encryption, and LTFS. One caveat, or two caveats really, as you're thinking about this, is LTO-7 Type M media does not support the worm feature. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this webinar. And they're not compatible with LTO-7 drives. Okay, so only LTO-8 drives are able to read it, and but otherwise, you've got all the other great features of LTO. The third reason, and this is a really important one, LTO remains the lowest cost storage that's available. And the chart we're showing here is actually from an updated economic validation study and summary that ESG, or Enterprise Strategy Group, just did on behalf of the LTO consortium. And what this analysis looked at was the 10-year total cost of ownership associated with storing a certain amount of storage. It was a pretty large amount of storage. And you can kind of see ESG did this study compared to, okay, if a user stored all of that content, all of that data on disk over 10 years, what is the total cost of ownership? It's, $15 million. If they stored it on cloud, it's a little more than $6 million. And if they stored that on mostly LTO-8 with a little bit of kind of disk and stuff in there to be able to provide more of like a NAS-based interface to tape, it was only about $2 million. So it's a huge savings versus all disk, huge savings versus cloud. And I think this is, just another proof point of how LTO remains the lowest cost storage. So we've talked about LTO as kind of this low cost archive storage, but there's this other macro trend in terms of more data protection that is driving a resurged interest in LTO. You can see some of the statistics of ransomware over the last couple of years. Huge increase in the number of attacks. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, and I thought this one was interesting. This was from a recent article. 31% of organizations have experienced a cyber attack. The really interesting thing about this is LTO by nature is an offline or air-gapped storage medium, and that makes it the most effective protection against ransomware. So if you look at this picture, when you think about LTO tapes being stored in a tape library, this could be from HPE, from IBM, or from Quantum, there is literally a physical air gap between the tape that's stored in the library, i.e. the data, and the network connected device, i.e. in this case, the tape drive. And because of that air gap, malware, viruses, things like that, can't jump that air gap, so to speak, right? This is unique about LTO tape. And even if we look at things like cloud storage for data protection or disk-based storage for data protection, deduplication, all that stuff, many malwares are becoming so sophisticated that they can kind of, follow replication streams across the network. They can go into the cloud. I mean, there's been instances, publicized instances where different public cloud companies have been affected by ransomware and malware. And so we strongly advocate that as part of a comprehensive data protection strategy, customers and enterprises need to have an offline storage copy as this ultimate protection against ransomware. And I've had, just personally, I've had many customers say they were moving away from tape and trying to get rid of it entirely in their data center. And because of some of the threat of ransomware and some of these really public ransomware attacks, they've moved back to using LTO and creating this copy on tape. One of the things that's great about tape, we've talked about low cost, right? Lowest cost storage, but cost is more than just acquisition costs. It's more than just operational costs. There's a environmental impact to storage. And not only is this, I would say, kind of responsible for our planet, there is a real financial and fiscal benefit of choosing greener storage. So some statistics from some stuff that we've looked at, some studies we've done, and I mean, there's a lot of different studies about this, but just a few highlights from some studies we've done about this. If a customer can convert 33% of their disk storage to tape, think about this in the context of, tiering in a sense, you could save 200 million megawatt hours per year. Again, not only is that responsible for the planet, but that's a huge financial savings when we think about TCO comparisons. Hard drive systems use 70 times the energy compared to tape. And in terms of the CO2 that tape produces over time, it's basically zero because tape is largely inert. So I would just say whether you think about this from the standpoint of, just having a less of an impact on our planet, or if you think about this from a pure dollar standpoint, tape is green storage, and this has a really big effect. Continuing to build on this, again, 8 reasons you need LTO-8, and 8 reasons that LTO-8 are great. This one is really about security, and it plays a little bit with, it plays a bit with the threat of ransomware and all that. But these are capabilities that we've built into LTO for a long time. Many enterprise customers continue to use LTO tape because of compliance reasons. And 2 features that we always have to highlight that I think really differentiate LTO in many ways are Worm and the way that LTO enables encryption or facilitates encryption. So in terms of Worm, obviously it stands for write once, read many. And when a tape is set up this way, when customers take advantage of this capability, we actually will store data in a non-rewritable format. So it protects the data from being overwritten. And I know of many use cases and customers I've talked with over the years that kind of require this from a compliance perspective and from a regulatory perspective. So key feature of LTO and one that we intend to continue to support. And of course, with military-grade hardware-based encryption, we introduced this with, I think it was with LTO-5. It was with LTO-5 or 6 where we introduced this. Really cool the way this is implemented because we use an AES 256-bit encryption algorithm, right? Basically military-grade. And the encryption itself is performed by the tape drive. It's performed in hardware, and it's performed basically in line with writing the data. So there's no performance impact, and there's also no impact to compression and all that, because the encryption happens after that. Whether you want to use an encryption key from your backup software or from an external third-party kind of key management service, that works, or key management server, that works really well with LTO. Let the LTO tape drive, let the LTO hardware perform that encryption. You get the benefit of that security with no performance impact. And the way that, kind of speaking for both HPE, IBM, and Quantum, the way that our tape drives and our tape libraries tie into your security infrastructure, it's very open. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to use different key management options, and really slick solution. Coming up on the end here, right? One of the things that has been an advantage of LTO for a long time is the fact that it's an open standard. In fact, this is really why LTO has come to be the de facto standard for tape storage, and why LTO is 90-something% of the tape market. We've got a really good ecosystem of partners here, and a really good ecosystem of vendors in the industry that maintain this as an open standard, and means that you as a user, not only do you get that kind of assurance and that flexibility of choice, but you get the benefits of this kind of open competition that's going to help drive down prices over time. The rest of the logos that are shown on this slide are companies that are have integrated in some way with LTO, and even with some of the LTFS capabilities of LTO. And again, just part of an open standard and part of making it easier to access content on LTO and be able to read and write data from LTO in a way that is an open standard, so you avoid that kind of vendor lock-in. Last but not least, LTO has a really strong technology roadmap. So, the consortium just published this earlier this year. We published an updated roadmap that goes through LTO Gen 12. Again, LTO 8 came out earlier this year, I guess right at the end of last year. And we're already working on LTO 9. We're working on kind of the spec and the definition for that. But the roadmap calls for continued pretty strong increases in terms of density and capacity, as well as continued increases in performance. And this is just a kind of a testament to the investment we're making in the technology, and the fact that we believe LTO has a really strong future, with driven by some of those use cases we've talked about: low-cost archive storage or cold storage for these big unstructured data sets, offline protection against ransomware and malware, and based on a lot of the other capabilities of LTO, continues to be a strong offering as part of an overall data protection framework. So that's it. Those are kind of the 8 reasons you need LTO 8. Be able to store more. We doubled the capacity of LTO 7 up to 30 terabytes per tape compressed. We've got this new feature or capability with Type M media that effectively reduces the dollars per terabyte by 50%. It's one of the reasons that LTO remains the lowest cost storage, and we're going to continue to innovate and develop there. We provide that offline protection against ransomware just due to the nature of and the attributes of LTO. LTO is green storage. We talked about the real savings there, both kind of economically and from a just environmental consciousness perspective. Related to security, related to enabling compliance, LTO has really unique differentiated features like Worm, AES 256-bit encryption. It's an open standard, and we've got a strong technology roadmap so that as you're looking at investing in different technologies, you can make that decision on LTO.